Alright, so you are empty. Man, this has been a game a long time in the playing, if that's a statement that makes any kind of degree of sense. This is a game I had on my PC, I think about 5 years ago. I managed to record one set of it, and then my version of Windows just decided to completely obliterate and render non-functional without any kind of update to the system. It just bricked You Are Empty, and I couldn't get it to run whatsoever. I was completely just confused and decided to kind of shelve it for a while, and it's only been recently that I played it again and again and again due to my own just breathtaking fucking stupidity. But anyway, we're trying to keep this under, short and sweet so I can be spoiler free. You Are Empty is a very much Eurojank first-person shooter by Mandel Art Planes and Digital Spray Studios, published by the 1C Company, that absolute bastion of what the fuckery that comes out of Europe these days. And it is a passable first-person shooter with some very interesting ideas. I feel like there's a certain artistic vision the game has that maybe it doesn't execute fantastically well, and definitely doesn't, support with interesting gameplay. But as a game that is strange and slightly inventive and slightly creatively odd, it's fun. It's an experience that feels satisfying, and funnily enough, despite a game that does suffer in the translation from Russian to English, the non-verbal storytelling it goes through is remarkably very good, and even the conclusion, where most games tend to shit themselves and fall over, actually feels satisfying and balanced. And admittedly, the ending cutscene does reference 9/11, which, alright guys, you only made this in fucking 2006, bit raw still, but okay, fine. But yeah, I would recommend this to people who want to try something that's Eurojank, but maybe not your classic Stalker or the Operation Matriarchy or Dust 12 or any of that kind of stuff. Like, this actually feels like it had some genuine artistic merit behind it, and for that alone, I feel like it is definitely worth experiencing. That being said, it's not commercially available. Night Dive are not remastering this anytime soon, so you're probably going to be looking at my abandonware to get hold of a copy, and probably needing to do some cracking to get the DRM to properly work, because otherwise it will fuck you. Oh, and this is the one other thing as well. The game has such old DRM that it does still need a Wi-Fi network connection, or some kind of network connection, even if it's not strictly internet-based. I discovered that the hard way when I reinstalled the game, then realised, oh, it just needs to be connected to the network, it doesn't even need an internet connection, and then I replayed the game twice. Anyway, that's the spoiler-free part of the review. Not that I think many people will give a shit about spoilers, seeing as this game is... It's not exactly cutting-edge, like, AAA content, but fuck it, anyway. I'll give you a moment. Back in a sec. So, first and foremost, You Are Empty is mechanically an incredibly frustrating first-person shooter. I've kind of spoiled myself recently. I'm replaying through GZ Doom, so I've been doing stuff like the Plutonian Experiment and TNT Evolution and Doom 2. I've been playing Dusk. I've been playing a Medieval. Like, I've been spoiling myself with these gorgeous retro, first-person shooters, which are perfectly balanced. The gunplay is exceptional. The feedback is wonderful. And then I go to playing You Are Empty, where you feel like you're walking around with rickets half the time, fighting enemies that hit-scan you or move so fast that even backpedaling you're not really going to be able to get any kind of distance on them, in such numbers that it is almost impossible to manage them later on into the game. It very much feels like, with some very minor tweaks to the way that damage and movement work in this game, it would actually be quite a tense, kind of fluid sense of combat. And yet they didn't seem to get that kind of balance right. And I'm very curious to kind of find out if this was intended to be a more survival horror experience or a more action-focused experience. Because as it stands, You Are Empty tries to do both and kind of fails at achieving either, which is a shame. Something that just definitely brought to mind is the Stalin Subway, which, despite being breathtakingly fucking dumb. Like, the plot for that game made me feel like I was having an aneurysm, like, constantly. I have never felt my brain trying to openly rebel the plot before, but the combat was incredibly tight. You had a fantastic selection of firearms, all of which had very unique but subtle differences in their use, and it was a very fun first-person shooter. It was dumb as a sack of bricks, and it was janky as all fuck, but yeah, I really enjoyed it. I'm looking forward to playing the sequel of that. You Are Empty has the selection of firearms, but never balances them, never gives them a specific purpose. You have things like the original bolt-action rifle, which kicks like a fucking mule and does some serious damage, but is so wildly inaccurate half the time. There is a bit in the fucking Metro where I fire like 3 fucking times and only hit what I'm aiming at after he hits me, sending my aim shooting upwards. Like, there are some parts to this game where you feel like they put the variety in, but didn't necessarily think about the function of every individual weapon. Things as simple as the pistol you get, which is I think a Mauser C96 equivalent, fires so slowly that it's not a decent panic weapon. Just at the exact moment where you want like a nice, simple, entry-level weapon which you can just spaff away at enemies with, it ends up being this really slow, clunky, unwieldy mess of a weapon with a reload animation that you can actually cancel out and negate the reload on. Like, all of this, no, none of this was right. All of this needed like a thorough reworking. And going on from there, the actual design for the enemies, while definitely hitting all the notes on the head in terms of fast enemies, slow enemies, flying enemies, tanky enemies like the big Shrek-like thing you come into later in the game, they all just have this slight quirk to them that makes them more frustrating to deal with. Like the tank being able to throw fucking... in fact, you know what? Hang on a second, let me just fucking Google this, because I'm just going to check. Let me just see when Left 4 Dead came out. Okay, 2008. This game came out in 2007. Left 4 Dead ripped off the tank concept from You Are Empty. You heard it here first. But genuinely, like straight out of the gate, like it's slow, it thumps around on its front 2 legs, and if you get too far away, it yeets things it just pulls out of its arse at you. That is actually uncanny in its similarity. So, yeah, there you go. One thing to You Are Empty's credit. Laid the foundation for at least one of the special undead from fucking Left 4 Dead. But, yeah, things like the rifle marksman who can just relentlessly spaff bullets at you from a distance, and will actually physically knock you back with every shot. The riveters who will duck in and out of cover, flush you out the grenades. The PPSH wielding soldiers later on. Like, so many of these enemies, if they were just made either a little bit more relaxed and not quite so aggressive, or spaced out their attacks a little bit more, would be a challenge, but not an outright problem to deal with. There are so many little just things where it's not that the game is badly put together, like there is no genuine, like, just fuckheadedness in the way the game has been constructed. It's just a death by 1,000 cut situation of questionable design choices, little bit here, little bit there. Like, I feel if I could get into the INI file and tweak some values, this game would become much better. Like, I'm talking from like a 4.5 to like a solid 8. Like, just strictly from speeding up the combat, tightening up the accuracy on certain weapons, maybe mitigating. Honestly, like, even if it's just moving faster and firing more accurately, that would make the combat more entertaining. And then if you could modify the AI to be maybe a little bit more versatile, a little bit more varied in its attack patterns, that would make this all very, very much entertaining. But, unfortunately, we've got what we've got, and it's not unholy in its badness. It's just sad in that it tries to do certain things and can't quite live up to its own intentions. That being said, the actual look and sound of You Are Empty, I really vibe with. There is something I've noticed recently, which is certain Eurojan games, sort of European, just there is a certain industrial, techno, upbeat kind of track. I'll see if I can find like a sample of it somewhere. I do believe the You Are Empty soundtrack is on YouTube, and I'll probably have it linked in the review description here. Just has this certain grinding intensity that is great for action, but also when you start going into the darker, quieter sections, you get this slightly more synthy, slightly more kind of John Carpenter-esque feel to it. And from kind of a artistic standpoint, the game is remarkably good at conveying this oppressive, grim, kind of late Soviet alternate history where, like, you have brutalist architecture all over the place with actually surprisingly very well placed use of real life Soviet posters and kind of in the theatre in particular, they did actually find classic Soviet era movie posters and put them in the cinema. Like, they actually did a little bit of like proper historical background work to make this feel like a living, breathing example of what a kind of retro-futurist Soviet world would look like. And it's grim, it's oppressive, it's grimy, but at the same time, it all works. It all feels like this oppressive, very much just, I don't know, it's hard to describe. It's like being crushed with a beautifully polished jackboot, if that makes sense. Like, it's that, you're admiring the craftsmanship as it breaks your jaw. It's such a strangely uncomfortable yet pleasant experience. And yeah, I would say that even if you maybe aren't engaging with You Are Empty on the physical sense of the quality of the gameplay, I very much feel that the look of it and the execution of the look and the sound design of it is very, very good. Okay, the English dub is not fantastic. In fact, I'd say it's fucking laughable, with some major editing issues when you talk to the guy who gives you the reel of film in the embassy, sorry, not the embassy, the town hall. You know, one of those sorts of things. It gets kind of interchangeable, but you get the rough idea. It's one of those things where they've had an idea in mind, and at the very least they've been able to get the kind of feeling of the game down pat. Now, kind of nicely dovetailing onto there to the final part of this, really, is the story. And normally, Eurojank games are pretty shit when it comes to the story, or they're incredibly minimalistic, or occasionally, like once in a blue moon, they actually hit the nail on the head and make something, you know, engaging and interesting. I look over and point at Stalker and go, that's it, that's the one. You only get the one. But, I just generally find that You Are Empty is a rather good example of good environmental storytelling. A few more notes than I would personally like, but it's not too oppressive. And whatever storytelling it does is, when it's not being done by NPCs, when it's using the kind of just fucking gorgeous FMV style kind of cutscenes, which are showing you the background of the main antagonist, you just get this fantastic sense of it's not quite straight up horror, but just this slight unease, this slight kind of otherworldliness to the world that you're existing in, and the development of this guy, who I don't think we even get a name for. I'm actually looking at the Wikipedia article and realising I don't think they actually gave the enemy the main antagonist a name. They just call him the Scientist. And it ends up being this huge descent into, like, the ideal Soviet nation, the ideal Soviet man. I believe they call it, like, the new man? That's the whole idea behind it, is, like, that was the ideal for the Soviet Union, was this new type of person. I'm not saying quite like Ubermensch, but, you know, that whole idea of it was just, like, a physical, mental, moral change in a person that could just, like, make them the ideal communist, and how that became a much more malformed and kind of malignant kind of idea that ended up horrifically transforming humanity. So I just find that it's, from a kind of story standpoint, actually playing with some kind of interesting ideas, and it's able to go through the plot without bashing you over the head with the real kind of, this is the message about this. It's more just going, here is a bunch of stuff, take a look at it if you like, enjoy the cutscenes, and when we get to the end, there is a very simple arc plot of, I'm going to find the guy who did this and try and stop him, which it resolves pretty cleanly. You get to the emitter where all of this has been happening, you discover that the scientist has actually integrated himself into the machinery, that there is no huge technological trick, it's just amplifying his own psychic abilities to just do it to everyone, which in of itself is genuinely, like, kind of admirable in terms of, like, he's the villain, but holy shit, he committed to being an arsehole. And at the other hand, it's kind of sympathetic in that this is his world. His idea of a perfect world ended up blowing up in his face, and he sees you and goes, well, I can quite clearly see this has not turned out how I wanted, so I will leave it to you, the one person who has been able to survive in this world, to decide whether to usher in whatever survives out of humanity into a new era, or go back in time and stop me from doing this. I don't think I've actually heard of a villain written in a way where he admits he's fucked up and gives you an option to undo what he's done. Like, if he has, then I love that, but as a trope, I find that both underused and incredibly satisfying, because it really humanizes the antagonist. It doesn't just make them this blind, cackling, kind of Jeremy Irons style, "Nah, you have never foiled my plan, I committed it 15 minutes ago." It's like, no, I fully realise you're probably not too pleased with me, and, yeah, I admit some mistakes have been made, so how about you go back in time and unfuck this? And like, even the time travel thing didn't feel like a reach, to be honest, because the way that the loop closes is the guy pulls out a gun, shoots the scientist, who at the time is trying to brainwash Stalin into accepting his plans to build the emitter, and we go back on our regular timeline. And it felt complete. It felt, like, thought out, and I can't really fault the game for that. Like, as an example of a small company making a first-person shooter, wanting to include some interesting ideas, but not make them the dominant overriding force, and while the kind of mechanics of the gameplay may not be fantastically engaging and a little frustrating in places, I feel like this didn't deserve the kind of slating it got. Like, when this came out, a lot of people were giving it, what was it, like 40% reviews and stuff like that on Metacritic. Like, people were giving this a pretty hard time, and I think like Brett Todd from GameSpot gave it like 1.5 out of 10, like calling it an atrocity. Like, I don't know if you've just lived a closeted existence where you haven't played genuinely bad games. And I'm not talking about games which try and fail. I'm talking about games that just don't give a fuck. Games that just do not even try. Because one thing I will definitely say for You're Empty is it tries. Good God, it throws a lot of shit at the wall. And while it maybe could have done with being a bit more tightly designed, maybe a little bit more coherently told, it's an enjoyable and interesting experience, and I think it is something that people genuinely may enjoy playing. There's even a bit of cut content that if you want to fiddle around with on the game console, you can actually spawn some missing weapons and some bosses that I think they were trying to include in, but didn't gel with the flow of the game. But otherwise, yeah, I genuinely find that You Are Empty is a game that has unfairly been lost to time, when in reality, it's a game that actively tried something different, tried to tell a story in a little bit more of an unusual way, and didn't stick the landing. It's unfortunate, but it happens. But anyway, I will leave it there. Thank you very much for listening to me ramble about this game, and yeah, I will catch you next time with something a bit janky, but hopefully something a little bit more, I don't know, heartfelt, earnest, and, you know, maybe good. But anyway, thank you very much for watching, and goodbye.